Welcome to Fireside Chat on the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network by Run Try Bike. We have Sofie Schunk with us today. Sofie is a lifelong athlete and certified coach who is living with type 1 diabetes. At the age of 16, she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, but that didn't stop her from pursuing her athletic dreams. She played Division I soccer at Marquette University, where she was integral in winning 3 Big East championships and a spot in the Sweet 16. Amazing accomplishments, but it did not stop there. She has co-founded Diabetes Sports Project, and it doesn't, now I'm really saying it doesn't end there twice. Pardon me. Sofie has won back-to-back Carlsbad 5,000 titles and has run a qualifying time at the 2024 U.S. Olympic Marathon Trials. That qualifying time made her only the third ever type 1 diabetic to achieve that milestone. We have a lot to talk to Sofie about, but before we bring her on, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network on your favorite podcast platform. There is a multitude of shows for you to choose from with various stories and hosts. I'm sure you'll be able to find one or all of them to your liking. So without further delay and without me tripping over my tongue, let's bring Sofie on the show and talk to her about getting diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at an early age and how that has both helped and maybe hurt her in the sport of running. Hey, Sofie, how are you?
Hey, I'm great. How are you doing?
I'd be doing better if I didn't trip all over your name as I was trying to pronounce Schunk as we made it along through that introduction.
It's okay. You're not the only one. Soccer refs back in the day used to misspell it and say chunky or chunk. So I had a lot of nicknames.
Well, with a last name like Bahamani, I'm very sensitive to pronouncing people's last names correctly. So the fact that I just got totally tongue-tied over your last name is somewhat embarrassing.
It's all good.
Before we get into the conversation about your athletic career, coaching career, one of the questions we ask every guest is our icebreaker question, which is pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
No.
Yes, absolutely. Great answer.
Savory.
What would be your favorite pizza topping?
Oh man. I mean, I always like a good meat lover's pizza, but I've been into like goat cheese or different types of cheeses. Yeah, but sausage, cheese, prosciutto, all the meat.
Goat cheese is a really interesting choice because it's got that tanginess to it, which would sort of change the concept of the taste of pizza. But I could see it being a really good choice.
Yeah, not a lot of it, but just like a subtle background flavor.
Yes. Yeah. The way you said that, are you a foodie?
I've dabbled. Whenever I travel for races, I always like to try a new restaurant or just somewhere that looks like very either cultural or local, fresh ingredients, like farm-fed type thing. So I wouldn't consider myself a foodie, but I do like to look for something unique. So
before I ask my first question, for those of you that are joining us live on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, gosh, where else are we? I'm not sure. Feel free to drop your questions in the comments and we'll make sure we get to them. Shout out to Kara, who is watching us on Instagram. Thank you, or Carrie, excuse me. Thank you for joining us from The Good Fight. So I mentioned type 1 diabetes in the intro, and I want to kind of go back to that diagnosis because you were 16 years old. Mm-hmm. This is a hard time in a teenager's life, period. What was it like to get the news of that diagnosis? Did you know what it meant? How did it change your life in that moment at the age of 16?
Well, this is going to sound weird, but I was extremely excited. But it was mainly because I knew something was going on in the background, and finally having a reason for that, I think just was like, thank goodness. Like, I know why I've just felt like crap. I've been falling asleep at my desk, even though I'm like a 4.0 student, was super into doing homework. Who knows why, but really liked my homework. But it's just like little things that just didn't add up. I was eating a jar of peanut butter a day, but losing 20 pounds and just like not processing any food, had zero energy. And I kept telling my parents, I'm like, I think something's wrong. And was trying to run track, play soccer, and like was getting by, but just something was obviously not right. And so we finally went to the doctor, and they accredited it to growing pains. They're like, well, she's probably just grown a lot, and but we'll do blood work anyways. And it was about a few days later. They actually lost my labs, but my mom came and took me out of high school and was like, we're going to the hospital. And I'm like, why? And she's like, because you have a blood sugar of 580. I printed out some papers, and so I'm like reading through it, and I was like, oh, this matches all my symptoms. Before realizing for the rest of my life, I'd have to take shots 3 to 4 times a day, and obviously know my blood sugars at any moment in time. But yeah.
So playing soccer and running track and having this idea in the back of your mind, like something's not clicking. When you finally got the diagnosis and you were like, okay, now I know that something is wrong. Did that change your mindset at that age when you went back to playing soccer and when you went back to the track, where you're like, okay, almost like Superman going into the booth and coming out, right? Like I've got this I've kind of got it figured out now. I can do better.
I wish. It took years to get there. But yeah, so I did start taking insulin right away. And the thing with insulin, and back then I was like an incredibly shy high school student. So I didn't want any changes to be happening, right? And like you're a high school sophomore trying to fit in, and everyone's into boys and makeup and everything. And I'm here having to take shots of insulin in the bathroom. And you actually you gain back the weight you lost. And so it was a lot of transition, trying to get used to playing sports again and running. Running was actually tougher to come back to. Actually, I never beat my times as a freshman on the track until my senior year. And even then it was different. And I think now I could go back and beat all those times, but that's because I've figured it out. I've met a lot of great people, and the technology for diabetes management has improved greatly. Soccer, I was able to get by a little bit better because it's stop and go, and I was actually a goalkeeper, so a little bit less running. So I could put like my insulin and my snacks in the goal box, and just make sure I was in check with my blood sugars and they were in a good range to play soccer safely. So while it was nice to know why I'd been feeling so bad. I didn't get that performance aspect back. Like, fortunately, I was able to get into playing in college, and it was really not until then that I met another type 1 who was on the cross country team, and just started working with professionals that were willing to not let sports be a showstopper. So.
We were just at the Angel City FC game where they played the San Diego Wave, and you mentioned being a goalkeeper. The goalie for San Diego is unbelievable. She was stopping everything. But Alyssa Thompson, who is a forward on Angel City, was running constantly. And so I'm thinking to myself, like, with you, until you said you were a goalie, I was thinking, that's a ton of running out on the soccer field. And how would you monitor your insulin levels and be able to consistently play? But because you were a goalie, did it just make it that much easier? Because the game is still going on. So like, how do you stop and check that information out?
You don't. So it did make it easier to an extent, but goalkeeper training honestly is really intense. But when I was at practice, it was a little easier, and I basically just got my athletic trainer on my side. And I talked about this to someone else this week. And the wild thing is, like, head coaches almost viewed me as a liability on the field, because if my blood sugar were to drop, I'd basically become not functional, right? Like, the first thing that goes is like sometimes your vision, I get really shaky. Same with being high, like your performance just drops. It can dehydrate you. You can get by with a high, but it's still your performance as a college soccer player is limited. So we found some really creative ways to check in. And the other thing is, like, I usually plan for a 2-hour practice, but in college, it's like, oh, y'all aren't getting this right. Like, we're going to go again and again, and 2 hours becomes 3. And then you're on the field for 3 hours, and I haven't eaten anything, and my blood sugar might be dropping. So my trainer and I kind of came up with a way, and I check, she'd bring it over to me, and I just do a quick finger prick. And she'd either, like, depending on what the number was, bring me like a full cup of Gatorade or a diluted cup, like half and half. So it was just a little bit of help, but like didn't spike me completely. Same thing during games. Yeah, but that was before I had a CGM. So CGM is a continuous glucose monitor. So now, like, I'll show you, it just goes to my phone and even pairs to my Garmin watch. So you can just see my blood sugars right on my phone, whereas that didn't exist when I was in
Right.
college. So it was just finger pricking, but we made it work, and I got really in tune with my body so I could feel when I was going low or feel when I was going high. And usually I was 99% of the time right. Just didn't know the exact number.
We talked about CGMs with Jenna Brown, who is a registered dietitian, a few weeks ago, and Lori, my wife, has one as well. And it is amazing how the body reacts to the sugars. And even though I don't have a CGM, like I've found myself watching what I'm eating and paying a little bit more attention to it because of what Lori is seeing when she's eating food and we're sharing it. And I'm like, okay, now I know
Mhm.
why I just crashed and took a nap in the middle of the day,
Right.
you know?
And
And
it's
it's
food that, like, you don't expect to, and I don't know if you've or she's noticed, but, like, stress too. It doesn't have to
yes.
be anything with food. It can be stress, can be environmental as well.
Yeah, what we've noticed and what she's noticed is stress is one thing, but another one is when we're out running, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is she will come back after a run and she'll say, "This is here, right, where you could see where my sugar, my blood starts to spike
Mhm,
here." And it was like, 30, 45 minutes into the run. And it really is amazing. So when I hear people who are runners and they're like, "Oh,
mhm,
I did a fasted run," I'm like, I mean, that's not a good idea. Like, have
yeah,
you noticed that, like, when you're out running for long periods of time, like, can you tell, "Okay, this is when I took a gel or when I ate
mhm,
something, and this is, I should have taken a gel or something at this point during my run." Has that helped you with your training?
absolutely. So I like to say we kinda have a fuel gauge in our pocket, with the CGM, but you have to take into other factors. So, yeah, if I'm doing, like, an easy, pretty predictable, steady, longer run, it stays a bit flatter as long as I'm fueling, and you start to see that dip, you take a couple of chews. So I'm a big fan of, like, frequency, over quantity, so not a ton at once, but more often. But the 45 to 50-minute thing actually, so my thesis in college was around creating an algorithm of, like, it was like black box modeling of what affects the blood sugar. And it turns out that your liver can produce glucose, and it's slower, and it doesn't start that process until you're taxing it. So if you start running or you start exercising, your liver starts to go into gluconeogenesis. So it does create glucose, but it's a delayed effect. It's slower because it's burning fat, it's burning protein, it's not coming straight from carbs. So that's probably why you see a spike then if you're not fueling. And it happens in type 1s too, but again, it's usually not enough if you're in danger of a low. But it is fascinating. If I'm like dropping a little bit, I kind of wait to that 45, 50-minute mark to see how much I'm able to compensate. Otherwise, I got to fuel.
I mean, since she started using it, like, it has been a game changer.
Mhm.
Again, I don't have one, but it's been a game changer for me in seeing what's happening to her and being like, well, I can, make some adjustments in how I feel. I've been pushing the number of calories I'm taking in on an hourly basis because I'm training for a 100 miler, and I'm somewhere around 400 to 450 calories now.
Mhm.
And it's just constant nibbling and eating and
Yep.
getting food and calories in through liquids and stuff like that.
Yep.
Um, I'm sure we could talk about this all day
Oh yeah,
because
I
I
could easily. I like you just sparked another thought, but we can move on.
no, go ahead, please add it.
Oh, well, yeah. So, it's interesting because they did start putting glucose monitors on people without diabetes and strong athletes, right? And they actually started to realize a lot of the stuff, like cyclists mainly, can fuel, I think, a lot more easier than runners. Although, don't quote me, I'm not a cyclist.
I've
But
I've raced Ironman, and it is much
Mhm.
easier to get calories in on the bike than it
Right.
is while you're running, without a doubt.
But believe it or not, like, they think they need a ton of carbs, which they do, but they're actually, like, insanely spiking their blood sugars with the wrong types of carbs. So, like, if you have a very concentrated sports drink and that's all you're drinking, they saw some of these athletes go up to, like, over 250, and when I'm over 250, I feel, like, not great. So, it's actually, I think, caused a lot of question of, like, what's the right ratio of carbs, and obviously liquids go to your system a lot faster. So, just managing, okay, so, like, for myself, I actually don't drink my carbs anymore. I just am too sensitive and I spike. But it works well for a lot of people. If I was in danger of, like, being too low, I would absolutely drink something. But yeah, so now I just do electrolytes, sugar-free electrolytes when I'm running. But that, and then I'm curious if she races, if she's seen any adrenaline spikes. So that's really hard to factor in with fueling, because you need that fuel. But if you're spiking, it's hard to fuel. And so I've actually now had to take some insulin before I start a lot of my races, so
Yeah,
that I can make sure I'm adjusting and absorbing that fuel.
we haven't raced since she started using the CGM. I do believe in a couple of weeks we're going to head out to the San Jacintos for the Beyond Limits Ultra, and maybe we'll see what happens there during a race environment scenario too. I want to go back for a moment to your time playing soccer. You played at the collegiate level, like I mentioned, 3 Big East championships and a spot in the Sweet 16. A lot of people come from backgrounds in other sports and view running as a punishment. But with soccer, it's already a lot of running. So when you were playing soccer, how did you view the sport of running, without a ball back then, where you're like, why are these people just running to run?
Yeah, that's a great question that I get asked a lot. Also, is this my plug for Go Marquette?
Yes, go.
It's March Madness, so
I'm gonna plug the Big East. I'm a '80s kid from the Big
yeah.
East back in the day when Georgia and now St. John's, played great to get into they won the Big East tournament. So plug the Big East.
Yeah, no, and it's cool following, because when I was in college, our basketball team made it to the Elite Eight, so we all caravanned from Milwaukee out to DC to watch. So it's pretty cool. Anyways, so back to your question, I think I've always just loved fitness, and especially when I started realizing it helps my blood sugars and it can be used as like a form of medication. And so if I have a baseline fitness level, I can actually take less insulin, and then that puts me more in that danger zone of going low while I'm working out at night, whatever it might be. So just like in general, and I'm excited that Carrie's on from Good Fight. I'm giving them a shout out. But like, I think a lot of these companies now or like in myself alone, like I use coaching as like, hey, like for the people that have type 1, like you can actually manage this in other ways. Even though we are, quote, insulin dependent, we depend on insulin to live, but there's ways to reduce how much insulin you have to take. And the supplement that Good Fight's looking into, and I know they were on your podcast at some point, but like it actually is now mimicking almost like a insulin in a way, and it helps you better digest a lot of your nutrients, and so you can actually take in more nutrients and not have to rely so much on insulin. And don't ask me on the science, I'm going to leave it to the experts, but long story short, there's ways to help your diabetes, and I think that's why I really just liked the running element of soccer, because I saw it helping as long as I was obviously fueling properly, making sure I was in range. I loved the weight room. I just always loved conditioning. And I loved obviously playing with a soccer ball, but my senior year, we were traveling to the Big East and to all those schools, and I had never been on the East Coast. I'm from New Mexico and had never seen the New Yorks and the New Hampshires and the Rhode Islands. So my assistant coach was a big runner. And we would get like an hour to go explore or whatever. And he would always go for a run. I'm like, hey, can I join you? And he's like, sure. Like, you want to run with me? And I was like, yeah, I just want to see the city. So I started doing that with him my senior year, and kind of just loved it. And then I knew I needed a challenge after soccer was done, and running became that challenge, especially because it's something I think going back to my high school, I never really quite figured out with diabetes. So it was my challenge to myself to get involved. So
Carrie gives you high fives on Instagram
oh.
for giving a shout out to Good Fight. And we
Yeah,
love
but I
them.
hope I didn't butcher what it is. What is your website?
Carrie, drop it in the notes so that we can make sure we get it right. But
Okay.
no, they're
Go to
great
their
people
website.
over there.
Ask
Carrie and
Carrie.
Amy are great people. So running with your coach in New England, in the New England area on the East Coast, sort of the travel by foot, would you say was the thing that propelled you into the sport of running? Like, I want to go see this stuff, and I don't know when I might have the chance to do that again.
Yeah, and actually to this day, I haven't really made my way back to the East Coast other than like DC and some of the bigger cities. But yeah, exactly. And also my sister was running collegiately at the time, so I got to give her credit to. And we've just always been an active family, but she was the one who really first, and she's 3 years younger. She ran at Texas Tech. She was really the first one who went from soccer to like cross country and distance running. And I thought she was crazy, but she was really good at it. And so it was funny because we would come back from like breaks, and she's like, hey, I got like 6 miles on the schedule, or 8 miles. Do you want to come? And I'm like, no, like I'll come for part of it. So we actually have this sisters loop, and we made a Strava segment out of it in the foothills here. That's 2 miles, right? And so it's 2 miles because that's about all I did as a soccer goalkeeper when she'd come home, and she's like also running fast paced training for college. And so she kind of got me into it too, and it showed me the ropes. And she's actually kind of been my first like running coach and mentor since she's went through it. And she doesn't run as much now. I'd love to convince her to get back more, but she's got a baby and still loves it for other reasons. And yeah.
What's your sister's name?
Hattie, Hattie.
Hattie, let's go. Let's get out there. Let's do it again. We got to go on the sisters loop and catch the QOM again.
Oh, we still run when I visit her in Austin. So, yeah.
So how do you go as a goalkeeper running 2 miles to half marathon to marathon? Like, how does that progression happen? Are you finding yourself getting better at it and you're like, maybe I can go longer? Or are you finding out, you know what, I just want to go further and see what I can do?
It's a mix. So I think it kept me sane while I was writing my thesis in grad school. Anyone who's written a thesis. So I also chose like the most bizarre thesis, and like literally was the only one doing what I did. So I was alone all the time. So I was like combining exercise science, engineering, biocomputing, and then like signals and systems. So I had professors picked from like, they basically had never met each other, but because of my thesis, I'm like, okay. So I was writing a lot alone, and just kind of went into this like spiral of getting stuck in like anxiety and depression, and knowing I needed to finish my thesis, but it wasn't good enough. I was being too type A. And it was actually the running club at Marquette that it was called Run with the President. Dr. Lovell started it, and he was like, meet us at Father Marquette. It's this big statue on Marquette's campus, and we go for a 4 to 6 mile run. And it was at like 6 a.m. twice a week, and it was for the students to interact with faculty and then the university president. I'm like, that's great. Like, I need something. So I just started showing up, and it would get me out of bed and get me, I think, on the right note to work on my thesis. And that warped into comparing aerobic versus anaerobic exercise in my thesis. So kind of started to just enjoy the runner's high for once, and no pressure on it like a college sport. And so these guys all, they had another running group called the Badgerland Striders, like, hey, we're training for a half marathon. You should join. And I'm like, no, too far. But fast forward, one of those guys, a professor, actually, he had a role at Marquette. He was type 1. So I'm like, oh. And he's telling me he's done Ironmans. He did an Ironman without diabetes and an Ironman with diabetes to show that he could do it. And I'm like, really? You can do that far with type 1? And he's like, yeah, let me show you. Come on a 15-mile run with us. I was like, okay. So I, of course, say yes because I'm a yes person. And that first one was just, I found myself going low. I didn't have any sugar on me. I had to go to a gas station, ask for a Gatorade, and said I'd come back and pay later. And I was like, I'm done. And he's like, no, we're going to do it again next weekend. It'll be better. And so did it again, and it was actually great. I got hooked, signed up for this half marathon with everyone, did surprisingly well. And I didn't know how well I did, but they're like, okay, now you have to run the marathon with us. And I was like, absolutely not. But said yes. So fast forward, I lined up at the starting line of Lakefront Marathon in 2016. And my watch died at mile 2. And so I just ran off a field, and I ended up running a 2:52 behind 2 girls that qualified for Olympic trials that year. And I had no idea what that even meant. And they're like, are you trying to qualify for Olympic trials? And I was like, no, this is my first one. So I was very fortunate to have a great experience for my first marathon. And then, sorry if I'm going to other questions. like telling this story.
No,
Um,
we love to hear it.
but
The
yeah,
question I have
so
for you is like, how
go
did
for it.
you, from that first 15 mile to the second 15 miler, what changed? Were you now I'm bringing food with me so that I can run, or liquids with me? Like, was that the change?
Exactly. Yeah. So I was like, I got to bring everything. I probably hadn't slept that well. Like, thought I could just do it off of no experience. I think I just was a little more mentally prepared as well. And running with John, he was kind of coaching me through like the diabetes side of it. And so I didn't go low. So I adjusted my insulin the day before and going through all the stuff that I know now that's really helped me get to the next level.
Do you think the watch dying at mile 2 of your first marathon was a plus or a negative? And before you answer, I will preface it with this. Most of us who are out here running are gadget to the max, right? Like, we know what we're using: Stride Power, we've got Garmin, Sunto, or Koros, we're looking at Strava data. Like, we're just analyzing data hand over fist, and oftentimes forgetting what it feels like to run. And so I wonder, for your first marathon, were you like, holy crap, I don't have a watch? Or you were like, well, let's just go for it?
Yeah, 100% on the positive side. I think in the moment I was like, "Oh, I've never run without a watch. What do I do?" But I'll tell you this. The week before, so I just following the training plan of this group. They're like, "Okay, let's do 3 by mile at what we think we're gonna run our marathon at." And so I ran with a group that ran 7-minute pace, because that's what I thought I'd run my marathon at. And um, then a week later, my watch dies in the starting line, and then I just go by feel. I'm running with like Marquette's cross country coach. We're just chatting, and I'm like, "How fast are we running?" And he's like, 6:28, and I was like, "Wait, what?" I was like in my mind, I was like, "I have no business running this fast." And he's like, "Well, at this point, you're on the train. Like, we're already at mile 10." He's like, "You either go big or go home." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I'm enjoying our conversation. I don't really want to run by myself." So I think if I had seen that I was running a sub 6:30 mile on my watch, I would have thought in my head, I have no business running this, and might have slowed down. So it might have self-limited my first marathon. I'm not preaching this because it could have, I'm well aware now, having gone through it, it can go the complete opposite way where
Yep.
you bonk and you're not finishing.
Yep.
But I was fortunate that it ended up being a good day. And I proved to myself I could run faster than I thought I could, because I didn't have a watch on. And I think I do still incorporate that training, like just not looking at least, or turning it over. And I know my like 8-mile loops around here, and I'll just go off of feel, knowing it's a recovery day and not wanting to run too hard. And I think with race pace too, it's wild how, like, as a coach, you prescribe 5K effort, and like a lot of people don't know what that is anymore. Myself included. Like, sometimes I'll see half marathon effort and it takes me a second. I'm like, half marathon effort. I'm like, I know what I can run a half marathon at, but it's effort. So how does the half marathon feel when you're in it running a half marathon? How does that feel? And like, go run that effort, which might not be your marathon or half marathon pace, but it's your effort. And so just, I think that's really important to consider.
How long do you think it has taken you to connect the dots on those two things, meaning effort, and pace? Because at some point, right, they cross each other's paths. And so, how long would you say it took you to really understand what the effort felt like in comparison to the pace?
3.5 years of on and off injury.
Yeah.
um,
No, and I think it's,
Honestly, so yeah, again, like, after that first marathon, my mind was like, how do we get faster? Maybe these girls aren't crazy asking me if I was going for Olympic trials. So I started to like Google, what does that mean? And I'm like, oh, this is awesome. How do we get faster? Let's go from my 35 miles a week to 70 and break myself, because I was not equipped for that, because I hadn't ever done 70 miles, and not even close. And so learned that the hard way. And then also was running with a group in Milwaukee. It was pace limited. I joke, like, this isn't offensive to them because they know I call them this. I ran with the old guys a lot on Sundays, and they know, like, they've been through the ringer, like they've run many marathons, and they know very well, like, not every long run needs to be at pace, because that's how you are resilient, right? It's more effort. And so I think I did a pretty good job in Milwaukee, but when I moved to San Diego for my first job and started training with a pretty high caliber team, like all ex-collegiate runners, I got stuck running my easy runs at 7-minute pace. And then my workouts were only at like 6:30 pace. And I was like 3.5 years of off and on stress fractures that I'd never experienced before and just could not learn the ropes. And so I think just really starting to work with someone and taking a step back, like, okay, listen to the effort and the pace. And then when you're early season, effort is the way to go. And then when you're getting close to a goal race pace, then you do want to start feeling out, because I truly think you do need to teach your body what that pace feels like. But again, you're having the pace drive what it feels like, not the effort. So
when you were in San Diego going through the injuries, were there moments of thought process of I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be a part of this sport? Or was it more of, I've got to hit the pause button because if I don't, I'm going to get burned out and I'm not going to really want to do this sport?
Yeah. So I jumped on the bandwagon of training for Olympic trials, qualifying. They were all training for CIM. And let's see. So come 2019 CIM, that was going to be my attempt, but I had just gone through this like trial period of off and on injuries, mentally just burnt out. Had a few good races in there, actually like loved cross country. Because I'd never run cross country in college. I was playing soccer. And so that was like the enjoyable part of my seasons. And I think that made me realize I needed to fall back on my strength and my speed. But after CIM 2019, I almost threw the towel in because I had a great buildup. I still PR'd by 3 minutes ish. I ran a 2:49, but I had been with that like 2:45 pace pack through 15 and completely just blew up, cramped. My blood sugars were really high. I didn't realize the nutrition on the course, the electrolytes had carbs in it. And so I was running at like 300. My hamstrings were cramping. I was incredibly dehydrated from my blood sugars. And I think, so all my friends that I had been training with qualified that day, and I was the only one that didn't. And so I think it was just like one of those, like, I know I could have done it, but it just wasn't my day. And it was so much like back and forth learning, and it was exhausting. So yes.
The perspective that you have gained over, a lifetime of dealing with diabetes and, your glucose and having to monitor it, this burnout scenario, potentially moving on from the sport, like how does that play a role in what you're doing today in terms of training, racing, and now coaching? And we'll talk about the coaching in a bit, but how do they all come together from a perspective point of view for you?
Yeah. So I think, so then I started, my San Diego stint honestly taught me that I knew I belonged at that level of running, and I really, really wanted to pursue it. And like, it was one of those moments, I think we've all been there. Like, I feel like I'm not racing like my training. And so I knew I had it in me, like my workouts had been going well. I just could not put it together on a race day. And a lot of it was blood sugar stuff and just like factoring in that adrenaline component that I don't think you can always stimulate in training. And so actually I will talk about this a bit. So Diabetes Sports Project is a nonprofit that came about around the time I transitioned to San Diego, and they kind of brought me on. And it was after I had reached out to one of their founders, and I was like, hey, I want to qualify for Boston. And I literally just want to run a marathon. And I'd already qualified for Boston, but it was more like I want to actually run a marathon where I can manage my diabetes and feel good at the end, not just like I was hanging on for dear life. And so that was the first time I'd experienced more high blood sugars in a race setting because of the adrenaline, because of just how sensitive I was to fluids. And so they taught me like how to be confident taking insulin before and after and practice during training. And a lot of those things that I think now I really want to carry forward today in what I'm doing, because that was such a game changer to me. And just going back to the basics of like, okay, I've been focusing so much on running, I forgot I'm living with a chronic disease. And that was building, right? And it was affecting how quickly I could recover from injuries. And I moved back to New Mexico in 2019. I took a job here. I still kept in close contact with my San Diego friends, but then COVID happened, and it honestly was a time that was a little bit freeing. I think I got really fit during COVID, but in a different way. I went back to the gym. I went back to sprinting. Wasn't really doing long runs. It was a good reset, focused on the diabetes element of everything. And so, yeah, I think to answer your question, long story short, that lesson was, I think, a big thing that kept me still going, because I realized there were resources I hadn't capitalized on yet. And now I want to give those resources back today.
I want to go back to 2 answers ago. You mentioned cross country, and you've recently posted that you are in your trail running era. And yes, I'm connecting the dots here.
Yeah.
How did the trail running come about, and what are the differences that you have observed between road and trail running when it comes to managing your diabetes?
Yeah, and this is actually an answer I just thought of, because I've been telling, like, people were asking me how is the racing and whatnot. I think it's just such a norm to fuel and to like carry a handheld, and not for cross country, but just the vibe is different. It's less on pace, it's more on competition. And not that that helps my blood sugar management per se, but I think when you're so goal driven on a pace, it's this added stress to the body, and you kind of forget just to like roll with the punches, which I think trail running embodies. I mean, every course is different. Like, it could rain and your course you ran last year on the same course now feels completely different because it's muddy and it's soggy grass and who knows what. Like, it could be freezing cold. But I think that alone just like teaches you how like no race is perfect. Roll with the punches. It's the same with diabetes. I can't just wake up and choose I'm not taking insulin today. It's more, it like helps take that pressure off, but also it's hella competitive still. And
Yeah.
so it's a different, yeah.
The
I
reason
guess.
why I asked that question is because, like, if you're running on the road, there's a very good chance that you're going to be able to maintain your pace between, a certain percentage, give or take. Whereas on the trails, right, 1 mile might have 500 feet of elevation gain. The very next mile might have 500 feet of descending. And then the next mile be totally flat. And so
Mhm.
30-minute mile down to 12-minute mile down to 8-minute, like, it's all just constantly
Yeah.
changing. And it made me wonder, like, are you having to pack all of the food that you can possibly pack to make sure that you have it with you so that you're not reliant on when the aid station might show up? Whereas on the road, you got a pretty good idea when you're going to hit an aid station if you need to grab something off a table.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you're asking me like I'm a seasoned trail runner. I've done two, so I'm not going to say this is my confidence boost here, but yeah. So I
I'm,
guess
I'm here to hype you up, Sophia. I'm here for you.
thanks. First 50K, like I fell in love with it, so we'll see where that goes. Right? I'm just
Don't be
confusing it.
shy. Don't be shy. It wasn't just the first 50K. Shout it out. Let the people know we're going to celebrate.
Yeah,
Sophie won the Mid South 50K last weekend.
Friday, yeah, and that was like 5 days after Moab.
Yeah. So,
But it was
yeah.
awesome. I mean, like it was just I can't describe why. It just was different. I think I don't know. But to your point of like each mile is different, came to me as like it's really just about managing effort. And I think on the road, we get so focused on like, yeah, there's a slight hill, but I still can't break from my like 5:55 pace. Whereas I have learned that though on the road though, if you talk to like all of the professionals and the elites, they do manage their effort. And I've actually like had the pleasure of running with that pack a couple of times when I can actually hang. And it's wild how they're okay dropping their pace to like over 6 on a hill, but then they bomb a downhill at 5:30. Like, it's all managing effort. And I think trail running embodies that, because you have to. You can't just keep the same pace. And to your point, like, it might take longer, so you have to be prepared. And I think we sometimes get too complacent that it's easier on the road, which I think it's actually in a way harder. Yeah, but like you think it's more predictable until it isn't. Whereas the trails, you got to just be prepared in advance
Yeah.
and carry. Yeah, I was carrying like 3 packs of chews and a full 16-ounce bottle, and like it just I could choose my own nutrition. And yeah, the aid stations had like some supplements, but it's more of a norm.
just reminded me, I wanted to ask you this question earlier when you were running that marathon and you said that you're at 6:28 pace without your watch. And I was wondering, like, did you feel like you could go faster at that moment? Or was it because you're the person you were running with? Because it sounded like this was a conversational pace that you were running at, like you would talk to each other. And so you weren't redlining it as of mile 15 of the marathon in that moment. Do you think you could have gone faster, or were you at that race effort that you were like, yeah, I'm pushing it now, even though I can have a conversation?
Yeah, maybe. I think short answer. I think I like very much enjoyed my first marathon.
Yeah.
So I'm just glad I didn't go to the well and bonk because I think if I did try to go faster, that probably would have happened because the last couple miles weren't easy, but I did get a boost when I got to 24 and I'm like, this is the furthest I've ever ran in my life. Like had like a little moment of celebration versus like, oh, 24 is still 2 miles to go, which often happens in the marathon. I got like almost a wave of excitement. And so I think that helped. And I guess I did try to push it a little bit at the end because the guy I was running with, he's like, that's the second place female. You should go try to get her. And I like tried to put in an effort and I was like, no, I like where we're at. But and like, yeah, we say, okay, that day it might have felt easy. It's never easy to run a
Right.
marathon. But put this in perspective, like I didn't run or beat that time for 5 years until I qualified for trials, or I guess CAM, but I kind of forget about that race because it was such a tough day. So yeah, but yeah, I didn't run that time again for 5+ more years, actually 7+ more years until 2023. So yeah. So yeah, it's easy, but like never take a finish line for granted because who knows when you'll get to do that again. Um,
You don't know this, but you just gave a shout out for t-shirts that we'll have coming out that says we never take finish lines for granted. That'll be coming out here real soon. And
oh,
it's true,
yeah.
right?
I,
Like
yeah.
you just don't know what's going to happen on race day. You could be as prepared as you can possibly be, have the
Mhm.
unicorn and rainbow training cycle, then race day, whatever happens, happens. And so you just don't go into it assuming I'm going to get there, and I think that's why I'm a big believer that we should celebrate every finish line. Even if we
100%.
don't hit our goals, right? You should still celebrate because it took you, you know, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, depending on how long you've trained for that single day. And you still
Mhm.
finish that race and you should absolutely celebrate it.
I finished
We
DFL at the Olympic trials. 40
No,
minutes slower than my
seriously?
qualifying time. Yeah. Well, so technically I wasn't last because like 40 girls dropped out.
Right.
Yes, should I have dropped out? Probably, but I was.
Yeah, but then somebody else would have taken up the mantle of DFL.
It was almost a finish line party just for me. So
There you go. I
everyone's
love it.
like, were you like? I'm like, no, I was not embarrassed. Like it was. I was out there to prove that you can still finish on a hard day. Like I had a hard day. Like I wanted to be there and compete, but like you said, shit happens.
That's it. Shit happens,
And
man.
honestly, like, if I think about it to this day, if I didn't finish that, I might not ever make it back. Yes, that's a goal, but who knows? And I think seeing, girls, like, young girls in the course, like, with type 1 signs, like, I'm type 1 too, because they had heard my story. It's just like, if I hadn't finished, I would not have felt fulfilled, right? Because we have terrible diabetes days, but we still have to like do enough so we can go to bed in a decent state. So
I love the mindset that you have there, and which lends us to get it right into the conversation about your coaching business, which is called Embrace the Grind. And one of the questions I was thinking of as I was going through the site over the last week or so was, what are you hoping to accomplish with your coaching business? And is there a particular type of runner that you'd prefer to work with over others?
mhm. Great question. I think I've toyed with this the last month and like we were talking before this, like just getting the button pushed was I think a big first step because I've been coaching athletes for a while now, like at least 7 to 8 years already. And the first one I coached was just because I volunteered coached for San Diego Rock and Roll to coach their diabetes team. There's 5 type 1 athletes, and they're like, hey, will you kind of write some templates? And I was like, sure, I'm not that qualified, but I know the ropes a bit, and they're like, we'll help you out. And so just meeting them and realizing I have a passion for mentoring, and I take that in the workplace too, I think got me started. And slowly over the years, I've built up more athletes just by kind of meeting them, word of mouth, running with them, whether it's at the workplace. So I'm a huge fan of people that have other passions outside of running, that are full-time professionals, that are living with a chronic condition, that have a family and like still want to accomplish big goals. Because I truly believe you can. And I think more than ever, you see moms and people that are pregnant running marathons, and it's just really cool to see people that are amputees and all of that, right? So my passion is there, but that being said, I coach people that don't have diabetes, that yeah. So I'm not limited to anyone, right? But truly my name for my business, Embrace the Grind, is like, there's going to be days you are just that is what it is. You're grinding and it's just not easy. It's like punch after punch, but you still want to get that run in. And I have to say, because I'm a little bit time limited, because I'm still working a full-time job, I do meet with everyone that submits something to me. And I truly believe in a meeting, because people that reach out to me, like they're going through something, they have type 1, they might just need like a ounce of motivation. So I always have at least a 30-minute phone call with them. I just am at a point where I can't take on everyone yet until I can financially not have to work full time. So I do have to limit it a bit, but I'm trying to like put some more templates together. And I think the criteria for those that I am taking on, it's like I can't handhold you out the door to run. So I like to coach highly motivated individuals that might just need a little bit of focus, or just they're like highly motivated in their career, whatever it may be, not running. They just need to be able to fit it in. But it's the motivation is always there, if that makes sense. I'm not answering this very well.
No,
I'm
you're
not closed
doing.
off to anyone, but it's I think it's people that just grind in everyday life, and they are so time crunched, and like proving to them that you can still train for a marathon, you can still train for a 5K, you can still run your fastest mile, whatever it might be is your goal. So
Yeah, I mean, not every day is unicorns and rainbows. Some days
mhm.
are good, some days are okay, and some days are downright horrible. But they all are part of building the character that you're going to need come race day, right?
Mhm.
Because you're going to go through those peaks and valleys on race day too. There's going to be moments where you're like, "Look at me," and then there are going to be moments where you're like, "Where's the easiest exit ramp to get out of this race? Because I'm done with this." And I think if you've gone through the process of training and having a coach who's been uplifting and supporting you and giving you inspiration and motivation, but also real talk,
Mhm.
then I think you can find your way through those valleys on race day as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the adaptability too, like especially having type 1. I sometimes wake up and you know what, it's not a good day for me to go on a tempo run, because I know what blood sugars will tank. And I'm a big fan of being adaptable in your weeks. Unfortunately, race day, we can't move a race, but in the week, like let's prioritize when you feel your best, and we can still get the work in, but it might look a little different. And
Mhm.
that's, I think, what's kept me healthy over the years, is just being honest with that, and looking myself in the mirror and like, hey, this is a really stressful work day. I shouldn't go for a tempo right now, because that's the same type of stress as my entire workday just was. Let's easy run and let's tempo in the morning when I'm rested. And so people that are just willing to get it in every day almost to a fault is my type of athlete, but like also where you can cross that boundary of like overtraining and burnout. So
Yeah, you got to be careful because you can easily get to burnout, and I'm an example of it. I've gone through a couple of 3 different moments of burnout in these sports where you are, trying to sneak stuff in.
yeah.
Before we get to our rapid fire food questions, where can people find you so they can get more information on either being coached by you or they want to follow your journey in sport with type 1 diabetes and be inspired by you? Where can they find you?
Yeah. So, and let me like give a shout out. Like am a huge fan of finding athletes like regardless of pace. Like it's to answer your question, what I don't not look for, it's a double negative, but I will never turn away someone who's like, I'm too slow for you. I'm like, hell no. Like if you are willing to put in the work, I don't care if you're running a 20-minute mile. It's more like I just need, a runner is a runner, and we can get that time down if that's your goal. It's more just like has that inherent drive, right? So I think a lot of times people are like, oh, like you run really fast. I'm like, I didn't when I first started. I barely ran
Right.
2 miles. Like, okay. Anyways, to answer your question. So my coaching business is Embrace the Grind. So it's let'sembracethegrind.com. And then my Instagram is Runs with Insulin. I will be honest, I am trying to get better at social media. That's like my goal for the year, but it's just a drain for me. So I'm trying to get help. But I do spend a night a week to go through all my DMs. So, yeah, or I'll do it sooner. And an email as well. It's sofschunk@gmail.com.
And that is
SOF, my last name.
SCHUNK for
Yep.
everybody who's
There you go. Yeah.
listening. All right. Are you ready for our rapid fire food questions?
Well, let's do it.
Let's do it. Oreos. Which is your favorite? The old school Oreo, the double stuff Oreo, the thin, or these abominations they call cakesters?
Definitely not those. I would have to say double stuffed. I like icing.
Any particular flavor
No, I
of
like the original.
the original? How are you eating the Oreo? Are you a dunker? Are you a spin and scrape? Are you a toss them in like aspirin?
Spin and scrape, but I also do like a good dunk. I just am usually too lazy.
I got to get to those Oreos as fast as possible. Licorice, red or black?
Black.
Oh, and a niece fan.
Yeah. I think
You
my
like
mom loved black licorice growing up, so it's always around the house.
interesting. I would think so. We've been doing this show for almost 3 plus years, and I would say the vast majority of the people say neither or red. Very few people have gone with black.
It's not. I honestly, I don't eat a lot of licorice at all because I'm diabetic. But
Yep.
if I had to choose black, for sure.
Peeps, are Peeps a real candy, or are they just marshmallows covered in gold glitter dust?
Fake. Anything that. Yeah, no. I guess I should be a little nicer.
Well, you don't have to be nice. They're
I'm not a
awful.
big fan
I don't
of.
understand how they're
I'm
still
not
being
a
sold.
I'm like in that crew that blows them up in the microwave, but never eats.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
We've been taught that peep jousting is a thing. Have you ever heard of this?
Mm-mm.
So you put toothpicks in their beaks, and then you throw them in the microwave, and as they expand, their toothpick
That's
swords.
hilarious.
So if you have nieces and nephews that are young enough that want to peep joust, that Easter's coming up, you could do that trick in the microwave.
Ew, I had my first nephew this year.
Oh, congratulations!
Thanks.
Candy corn, is candy corn a real candy, or is it just earwax covered in sugar?
It's a real candy. But
Really?
again, it's not my go-to.
No, it shouldn't be anybody's go-to.
I don't usually eat candy corn, but I think it's a candy. It's sugar.
You're being way too politically correct. You can absolutely dunk on candy corn if you think it's awful, because it's awful. I will say that.
I will eat it if I have to for low blood sugar. Let's put it that way.
Oh, well, that makes sense. I can get behind that.
Oh yeah, you don't even want to hear about low blood sugar episodes. We could have a whole episode on type 1 funny stories. I could have a jar of honey in front of me and like that's the most logical option, but I'm like, no, I want the most obscure candy that I can find that's probably expired.
Is it because there's like a craving for it, or
your brain is not functioning that well? And yeah, there's an odd craving for the weirdest things that I actually don't like in daily life.
Can you recall a candy that you were like, I really want this, and it is a candy that they stopped making like 20 years ago, like the Reggie bar?
No, but it's usually things like nerd ropes and stuff that I used to like as a kid that are also disgusting.
Hey, nerd clusters have made a huge comeback. They're a big
I don't even
seller
know.
I'm a candy fiend, I know. Creamy or crunchy peanut butter? Which one do you prefer?
Either. I love nut butter.
Yeah, but we're a hard-hitting journalistic society here. We have to have an answer. Can
Probably
only have
crunchy.
one. Crunchy.
Yeah.
Are you a peanut butter and jelly fan? Do you eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches? No. Next question. Red velvet cake. Is red velvet a real flavor, or is it just chocolate cake dressed up to go to the prom?
Chocolate cake dressed up to go to the prom. Yeah.
I'm with you. Although we have gotten comments, they're like, no, it's actually a particular flavor. You have to use alkalized cocoa and all of
No,
these
I mean,
things.
yeah, you, like, manipulate it to look red and stuff. It doesn't taste different, I don't think.
No.
And I like chocolate, but that's why I probably like red velvet, so.
Yeah. So when it comes to cake, do you have a preferred flavor of cake? Vanilla, birthday cake, chocolate, carrot cake?
Mm, that's a good question. I like chocolate a lot. I don't really eat cake that often, but, I like ice cream cakes or, like, cheesecake
Ooh.
frosting, so anything with cheesecake frosting. So carrot cake is delicious.
Yes, carrot cake is fantastic. It's my favorite type of cake.
Mhm.
S- Savory or sweet for the rest of your life? Which would you prefer to eat?
Savory easily.
Do you have a particular meal in mind that when you say savory, you're like, that's the meal I would absolutely have as if it was the last meal I ever ate?
Steak.
Just steak, just throw it on a plate, give you a knife and fork.
Yeah. Um, yeah, steak, or I just love making tacos. I think it's the easiest low-hanging fruit for any athlete out there. Like, you
It's
can get a
true.
good protein, you can get salt, you can make a taco bowl, so a ton of veggies, beans, all of that. Yeah,
100%.
that's actually what I'm gonna make after this.
I love it. Chocolate
And you
chip
can,
or
like,
oatmeal?
crunch up tortilla chips in there for the salt.
You can get some texture in there. I'm totally down with it. Chocolate chip or oatmeal raisin cookie?
Chocolate chip.
Last question. Tray of brownies has come out sitting on the table, cooled off. Are you going to the edge? Are you going to the corner? Or are you going to the middle of the tray?
Middle.
You like the ooey gooey part?
Mhm, for
Can't
sure.
go wrong. Can't go wrong. Sofie, thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who are listening to us live, head over to runtrymag.com, search for Sofie, Sofie, Schunk, Schunk. You can read her How It All Started on our website. And this will be on our YouTube channel by tomorrow, the 19th of March, and on our Everyday Athlete Podcast Network in 10 days. Sofie, thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to continuing this conversation and following your journey through the world of trail running.
Thank you.
Have a
And
good
road.
night, everybody.